Hi everyone, I'm Dan Meyer, and as long as I've been a teacher, I always swore I would never ever talk in front of teachers. Um, it's kind of a losing game, really, from my experience. I've sat through the department meetings, the new teacher project meetings, department meetings, and in every meeting, there come this point halfway through the presentation or talk or whatever, where I would look somewhere above the speaker's head, usually at a light fixture, and pray, please God, let that fall. And and who needs that kind of pressure, right? I mean, that's just awful stress. The only reason why I'm up here, doubling back on a very strong resolution, is because I was offered the opportunity to talk about my most favorite part about teaching. What is that? Any thoughts? No, it's not the motor pool. It's not the salary even. It happens to be assessment. And I'm not talking about the spring STAR testing, the standard test. I'm talking about the day-to-day grind of assessing our students. And it really just freaks me out. It excites me in a way that not even a really good movie does. I enjoy punching scores into our grading system more than I do, say, a fine single malt whiskey. I realize that this is kind of a deranged opinion, but it's a real one, and I would love to take a few minutes to talk to you about why this has become such a thing for me. And to do so, it's really necessary that I tell you first what used to be my least favorite part about teaching, which was truly assessment. During my student teaching year, I had this really uneasy truce with assessment, where I knew it did me some good, and I knew that it intimidated my students. And as a student teacher, intimidation is a valuable currency when you look like you should be a student there. It's really important that your students have some fear for you. So I was on board with the status quo of assessment, but I really felt failed by it in a series of key ways. Let's talk about tests. For me, I would pull a test out of the supplementary packet from the textbook, and it was double-sided. It covered, it was long. It covered about 20 pages of the textbook, and I gave it every couple of weeks. I would grade it over the weekend. Took me a while. Pass it back next week, and on we would move to the next topic. And that's how it went the entire year. For example, here we have Greg Mays, our student here. We're going to talk about Greg Mays, an example student, not a model student. He got on his chapter 1 test, unit test, 62%, not great. But I would keep on moving, and we'd do a chapter 2 test, a chapter 3 test, and a chapter 4 test. And all of a sudden, it was the end of the grading period, and Greg comes into my class and freaks out. He wants a good grade, and this is just how it goes. Of course, they don't come in anytime until the day that grades have to be locked down. So he comes in, and he really wants a good grade. I really want Greg to have learned more than he has, and I feel like our assessment method should allow for some sort of common ground there. And so I would look at my book here and see this score sheet, and even our high school students could really tell us where to remediate here. Obviously, chapter 3 and 4 are looking pretty good. Chapter 1 isn't so great, but it's definitely not bad as chapter 2. Bravo, I now know that I need to spend whatever little time I have with Greg on the chapter 2 unit. Problem is, though, that the chapter 2 unit covers so much material. I mean, it is a dense chunk of text. And so if Greg doesn't have his test on hand, or if the test has been thrown out or whatever, I could spend seriously 10 minutes trying to help Greg figure out where Greg is deficient. And as all of us as teachers know, even on a block period, a 2-hour period, we don't have 10 focus minutes to spend with a student, because 10 focus minutes means that behind our backs, there are 2 students on our computers selling our classroom on eBay. True story, this happens. We know this. And I felt just really let down at that point by the classic model of assessment. So we call it the classic model, and differentiation is difficult in the classic model. All we have is these really broad test categories, and they don't allow us to see deeper and with more focus into a student's differentiation issues. I also, as a student teacher, really had a hard time with how much my students hated tests. And a lot of us have accepted that as a part of life. But the fact is, my students would beg, whine, they would cheat often, they would cut class to come in later and retake it after having talked to their friends about what was on it. It just was the biggest deal to them, and really all I wanted to know was, hey, is the teaching working for you? Or hey, did this method work well for you? I'm not asking for your ATM pin. I just want to know, is the teaching going all right here? I don't want a pint of your blood. But to my students, this was a serious thing, and it just bugged me that under the classic model of testing, students just tolerate it. And I think we can all agree that that's a best case scenario right there. That's being generous. Typically, students outright hate testing. They just don't see the buy-in with it. They don't have any buy-in with it. My final just real dissatisfaction with the classic model of assessment comes here with a certain kind of student. And on the two extremes here, we have understanding over the school year. And the two extremes are this: is the high road student who just intuitively gets school and is able to do well on tests straight away from the start. There's just very little resistance to new concepts. The high road student's willing to put in the work at the onset, knowing that this will mean a good grade throughout the year. Then there's the low road student, and there are a lot of them out there. And at my previous school, we would have just so many of these students who, for various reasons, say a student commits a crime and is in juvenile hall for a month and is out of school for that month. Or a student's family member dies in Mexico and has to travel back for a month. These students just take a long time to get in gear for school. Then there's also all these students who just, for one reason or another, lack the incentive to get going with school until that day that someone offers them, a car for good grades, or says, yeah, we won't let you play sports unless you have good grades. And then all of a sudden, at that point, the low road student wants to kick it in. And even if the low road student gets the same understanding as the high road student, something terrible happens. And that's this, is that the high road student, the grade matches the understanding all the way through the year, because that's how the classic model is built. The low road student, though, because the low road student is saddled with all these Fs at the very start of the year, and there is no retake under the classic model, and there's no going back under the classic model, the grade remains low even if understanding is high. Philosophically, we either agree that since the low road student and the high road student have the same understanding, they should have the same exact grade, or we disagree. And I really, looking at it from all sides, I can't understand why they should deserve different grades. Except for this, and I'd like you to ask yourself this question: was I a high road student in high school? And I think a lot of us teachers were. The majority, I would say. We've gone through college, we've been accredited. A lot of us were the high road student, and I feel like that leaves us with very little empathy for the low road student who takes that time to get to the same understanding. We see that low test grade as, hey, this is your lesson, kid. You need to learn this stuff faster the first time. I think if we're not careful, we can be really unempathetic towards the low road student. So what I'm looking for then is a system where the grade for the low road student stays as constant as the high road student. Moreover, I want a system where the C student's grade matches a C understanding, where no matter where you are, the system treats you fairly. So, to review here real fast, differentiation is difficult under the classic model. Students just tolerate it, and it rewards progress very slowly. You have to schedule a retake with a teacher on our own time in order to get some sort of a higher grade, in order to remake up some low grade from before. So what I'm looking for then is a system that differentiates like a champion, that gives me a laser sight towards where students do not understand the concepts, that students look forward to it. And I know that sounds crazy, but just watch. I want students to have buy-in with this assessment. I want them to see that all I want to know is what they know, and nothing more, not to punish them and not to scare them. I also want a system that rewards students continuously, that a slight uptick in understanding is matched by a slight reward in the grade, that if you post a huge gain in understanding, that your grade will go up proportionately. This is what I want. And this is what I found. I'm going to call it the new standard, which is a very pompous sounding name, I agree, but we got to start somewhere. So the new standard here. And here's the serious issue. In terms of work, the new way to assess is easy, much easier. It's working smarter, not harder, blah, blah, blah. But it requires a serious mental readjustment at the onset that can be very difficult. And that's this, is that the textbook asks us to think of learning in terms of chapters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the fact is that learning does not take place in the confines of a textbook. It takes place in concepts and skills. For example, diagramming a sentence, solving constant speed problems, graphing linear equations, identifying musical genres. Learning is skill-based, not textbook and chapter-based. This is the serious issue here. So instead of testing chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, I test skills and concepts. So here's chapter 2, that unit test. I've broken it down into these individual skills. And what I do is, on a weekly basis, I will test 3 of them. You can test as many as you want to, but 3 means that I have enough time to go have some fun on the weekend, and I'm not just tethered to my grading program. So on week 1, I'll test these 3 right here. Week 2, here's the great part, is that under the usual classic model, week 2 will have none of these concepts. I mean, maybe a little review, but for the most part, we've moved on. Week 2, I test, I drop one off, the oldest one, and I bring a new one on, and we still have those 2 that they've already seen. They've already seen the format of these problems. They've seen how it looks. They know what to expect. The problems are more difficult. They're more rigorous, definitely harder, but they've seen the format. They need to know what the format will look like. Then week 3, we keep on going down and taking one off, adding one on, taking one off, adding one on. And then here's where the magic happens here, is on this sheet, the skill checklist. What we have here is these 2 tests. These are the ones from the start that were tested twice. And on the first try, let's say Greg Mays gets a 2 and a 4. These are all graded on a 4-point rubric. It's very easy, very fast. I mean, the tests just slide right through your hands as you're grading them. And Greg here got a 2 on solving proportions and a 4 on converting percents. And that 2 there, that's a bad grade, not a good one. That's 50%, low score. Converting percents is a 4 out of 4. Way to go, Greg, 100%. So let's say Greg comes in. Let's say we had a free moment in class, and I want to help Greg out. Do I know where to remediate? Absolutely yes. More than any other system I've found. I have this right here. I know I'm going straight to solving proportions. If the whole class is having low scores on solving proportions, I'll toss some of those problems into the opener, or we'll review a worksheet or play a game reviewing these things. And then the next week we assess again. And here's Greg next week. Man, nice work, Greg. Remediation clearly worked well for you. You got that 4 on proportions, another 4 on converting percents. So what do we do? Under the classic model, Greg has that 2 and deserves that 2. He did not learn this at the very start of class when the test was given, so therefore he deserves that low grade. But this is such an injustice, and it is honestly, it's why I can't even quantify it, but I'm sure that a large percent of why our students see their teachers as adversaries is because of this system, this classic model system, where they are punished for stuff they didn't know when I arbitrarily decided to assess them. So instead, I get rid of that 2. I take the 2 away, and instead I just leave that 4. My grading process, when I enter them into the computer, all I do is I put in higher scores over lower ones. And so Greg keeps his highest score. Okay? And then on the bottom one there, converting percents, he has 2 4s. Now in any other classic model of assessment, Greg should still show me every test I give it to him that he can convert percents. The test looks the same for every student. But here's the thing, is that Greg has shown me once on an easy problem that he can do it, and again on a really hard problem that he can do it perfectly. And so what I tell him is this. I say, Greg, you have mastered converting percents. You don't need to do it anymore. And I sign a sheet that he has right in front of him that has all the concepts for the year listed on it. And he knows the next test that he will not have to do converting percents. And I just need you to think about how Greg feels about this. Greg's a guy that has hated math for a while, definitely hates tests. He sees them as ongoing, unfailing. They'll never stop. There's no difference from one test to another. If he does well on one, it's the same test next time. And all of a sudden, he has an endpoint for every concept. He knows exactly what he does not know. The test is tailored to him. There will come a point, I promise you, somewhere in the year where Greg will have passed 5 concepts, and on a 6-question test, he will cross out 5 of them and just do the most recent concept. Greg has never felt more fairly treated than with this new standard of assessment. For possibly the first time in Greg's life, he feels served by tests. And I'm a cynical guy, I'm not prone to huge emotional outbursts here, but honestly, punching in grades into my grade program is a therapeutic experience. I really enjoy doing it because it always shows the best students have. It shows progress. There's just a few consequences to this thing, and that is that the end of the year review is such a breeze. Let's say you have 2 block periods at the end of the semester to review some stuff for the STAR test or for the final exam. What do you review? Well, with the new standard, all you do is you sort every concept you've tested by grade, by percent. You take the bottom 10, do 5 a day. Nothing could be easier, really. And then there are no makeups under the new standard. A student misses a test. Under the classic model, I would have to postpone passing the test back until I could schedule a retake on my own time during my lunch period or before school. And by the time I passed the test back, no one cared anymore. It really was a drag how one student could hold an entire class hostage like that. With the new standard, all I do is I fill in zeros on the new concepts and let the student keep their old grade. And then the next test, when the student takes it and pulls down a 4 or whatever, I fill that in over the 0 and suddenly the grade goes up. The burden is on the student, though, to make up the test. It's such a liberating thing. It's also never too late for success. I can't tell you how many times the new standard has bailed me out of a really contentious parent-teacher conference where the parent is just asking for all these accommodations with his or her student, wants all these retakes, and all I have to do is say, yeah, if Greg wants to come in the last week of the semester and prove to me on these concept quizzes he can get 4s on all the quizzes, I have no problem filling those grades in and passing Greg. Greg decides when he wants to stop trying, not the system. There's never a point at the end of the semester where I say, guys, you had a 23%, there's no way you're going to make it. I'm always able to offer students that promise of success, which is a huge thing for them, a huge thing. Look, from my perspective, being called to teach teachers has to be one of the most frustrating callings imaginable. I mean, I'm new to this, more or less, pretty inexperienced, and yet I have sat in lectures in professional development seminars and dismissed really good ideas because I just feel so comfortable with my own practice. I could be up here right now telling you guys that, hey, we get a 6% raise, and you guys would still, grade your papers, So I understand this, I do, and I just really want to communicate, if nothing else, my enthusiasm for this system and promise you that there is a really great way to assess out there. And if you could just do me one favor, one final thing here, out of respect perhaps for the impossibility of my situation here, I would really appreciate it if you would ask yourself this question. When was the last time you walked into your classroom, canceled a test, and your students were angry with you? Listen, I got 4th prep, 2nd prep, before school, after school, lunch. My email here is dmeyer. Listen, I really believe in this system and its power to transform you and your students. I would love to talk to you during any of those times, whenever you want to. Feel free to contact me. Thank you so much.